When I learned that you could use a jelly plate to make monotypes at home without a press, I had to pick one up and give it a try. I have a degree in printmaking and I worked in commercial printing for over 24 years. In this video, I'm going to test out a number of materials on the jelly plate, and I'm going to take what I learned and use that to make a final print. So let's get started. I bought the 5x7 jelly plate. You want to keep the clamshell because you can store it in there. It has 2 mylar sheets that you can remove. You want to protect your surface if it's like a wood table. So I have a cutting mat here, and that'll keep the mineral oil from soaking into it. You can use any acrylic paint on these jelly plates. I'm going to use golden open acrylic because it stays wet longer. And you can start off with just regular copy paper. You can practice with that. So that's what I'm going to start off with. Most people seem to squeeze the paint right out onto the plate and roll it out, but you can also use a glass palette. I have my Masterson Stay Wet palette. I don't have the sponge in there, but I did put like a glass cutting board in here. I have a full length video on how I set this palette up. The link is in the description below, and I'll also put a card at the top. If you're not sure about whether or not you're going to use open acrylics, this is the intro kit. There are 6 colors in there. You can also get the 12 color kit if you want more colors to work with. You don't have to wear gloves, but I wear them because it makes cleanup easier and it keeps the paint from getting underneath my nails. This is ultramarine blue and you don't need much. I have 2 different brayers. I have this hard rubber brayer and this is a softer brayer that's made by Speedball. And the roller can separate for easy cleaning. So I'll just roll this out. I think I need more paint. I'm noticing that it would probably help if I had white underneath here, so I'll probably put a sheet of paper underneath. That gives me a much better idea of how dark this is. So I'll just press this down. Actually, gloves kind of interfere with that. And there's my first print. So now I'll test out a bunch of different materials. I have a whole slew of things to test out. I have these Posca markers, Liquitex acrylic markers, high flow acrylics, which I think they're going to beat up, but I have an idea of how to solve that problem. And I have the Liquitex acrylic inks. The easy way to shake these up is to keep them in the packaging and shake them all up at once. Same with these. I'll start with the Liquitex markers. The thing you want to keep in mind is you don't want to use anything sharp on here because it could scratch it. So anything with like a soft tip is best. You don't want to use like a hard pencil or a ballpoint pen or a real scratchy like drawing pen. And the other thing to keep in mind is if you draw directly on the plate, it's going to be backwards. You can see that the marker is beating up, and that's not a problem. This is just a test, and I'm finding out how these materials work on this plate. Once I figure that out, I can build on that and make some good prints out of it. Let's see if the Posca markers do the same thing. Here's the Posca marker. I'm getting the same effect. I'm just using a paper towel and water to clean off this brayer for now. I have a bottle of this Liquitex matte medium, and I'm thinking if I coat the plate with this and let it dry, I might be able to draw on top of it with a marker and not have it repel. So I'll just put a drop on here. I'm just going to do the bottom part. I don't want to do the whole thing. It's good for now. I'm going to wash this out right away because this isn't slow drying at all. While that's drying, I'll try out this pen. That doesn't really stick very well. That doesn't even come off the brush. This is a Faber-Castell graphite pencil. This is tracing paper and I'm just writing on it normally. Here it is face up, and I'll place it face down onto the plate and then burnish the back of it. So it did transfer to the plate. Here's a kit of the Liquitex soft body acrylics. It's a 12-piece set and I just opened them all up. So I figure I'll use this paint as a test sample on the side of the plate. There was some water in my brush and that's why that's beating up, I think. The matte medium is dry and I tested it out and it seems like it works better. You have to be careful that you don't scrub it off the plate as you're drawing. This is the big brush pen. This seems to work really well. You can also go thick. I think that right there is where the medium didn't cover the plate. This works pretty good though. And then here's my brush pen. It's kind of nice too. And these are the Posca pens. I have these Liquitex Basics. I'm going to mix up like an off-white beige color and I'll use it to pull the print. This time I'll try out the soft rubber brayer. I'll try the Baron to burnish the back of it. Here's the print. I made a mistake and I lifted it too soon. So that's the first thing I learned is that if you want to pull off dry paint, the top coat has to dry a little bit in order to pull this paint off. I was able to salvage it to some degree. I applied more of this beige color and it did lift the colors. I did lose this little bit here and some chunks here, but we got a result. and I think that the marker works better on top of the matte medium. And the pencil works really well, so we'll build on top of this. I'm going to do more drawing with the pencil, and I'll test out these acrylic inks. I have the high flow acrylic, and maybe I'll even use some of the Liquitex acrylic ink. I also left my plate sitting overnight with paper on top of it, and you can see that it pulled out some of that mineral oil. If I pull this off of here, it leaves the stain on there. And that's why you want to protect your desk. Think about this oil seeping into your wood desk or whatever surface you're working on. The other thing is you don't want to use these mylar sheets to protect your plate because you get air bubbles trapped underneath there. And those air bubbles can actually leave an impression in your plate. So just store it with a sheet of copy paper on top and it should be fine. Last night I also set up this registration system. It's a sheet of plexiglass and I taped on this piece of hardboard on here. I came up with this sheet where I can line my 5x7 plate up on here, and then I have different size papers on here. So if I have a half sheet of 9x12, I know where to line it up. And the same for 8x10. First I need to cut this. Once I have it lined up, I can just tape it down. And so this is about as thick as the plate. That way, when I tape my paper down to the side, it'll be the same height as the plate. So I'll just line my plate up to the square. And now I can line up a sheet of paper like this, and it'll be perfectly lined up with the Gelli plate. The cool thing is I can tape this down, and when I want to add extra layers, it'll be perfectly aligned. The benefit of having this raised edge over here is that if you had a short piece of paper and you just taped it down here, you see how that buckles up? Whereas if you have a piece of wood underneath here or cardboard, it'll be the same level as the plate, like it is on this side. You don't have to do this, but I was just thinking that it'll make it easier to line the print up to the edges of the paper and to do multiple layers on the same print. This is the delicate surface masking tape from Scotch. Leave a comment below if you want to see a full video on how I made this registration system in more detail. I also thought I would try out these different printmaking papers. I have the Strathmore printmaking paper, a pad of Stonehenge, and a pad of Strathmore Bristol. Some of these are a little bit large, so I'll cut them down. This is the Fisker's rotary trimmer. It's lightweight and it also folds in half, so it's great if you have a small studio or if you want to move it around from one workstation to another. I'm making this 7x10, and you can cut more than one sheet at a time. This is pretty thick, but it says it can do 20 sheets at a time. So there's the Bristol. This is just some tracing paper. This Stonehenge is 9x12, so I'll cut it down to 9x6. There's a locking mechanism here. If you slide it to the right, you can lift up this paper guide, and that way you can easily slide your paper in here. I like to mark the back with a type of paper, and I put a B on there so I know it's the back. This plastic guide makes it easy to tell where you're going to cut. So I have these reference photos. I need to cut between this gap right here. So that makes it easy to cut between these two. So that makes it easy to trim off all the white gaps around the outside of a photo. When I want to move this out of the way, it just folds right up, and now it takes up half the space. And it's pretty light. I have all the supplies listed in the description below. I'm going to do a quick sketch and transfer it to the plate. I'm using tracing paper because when I turn it over, I'll be able to see through it and line it up where I want it on the plate. Here's my plate all set up. I put more packing tape on here so this won't rip. This is the sketch that I did of that boat, and this is how tracing paper comes in handy, is that when you turn it over, you can see where it lands on the plate. So I'll press that down with my hand, and I'll use this Baron to burnish it. This has like a fabric on here, and I do think it glides around a little bit easier than the plastic one, but they both work. I'll lift up a corner to see how well that transferred. It's not bad. So I'll go with that. The thing with working with a reference photo is that you have to work backwards. So it might help to actually flip it and print it out backwards. So when you paint, you can see where you're working from. I could also just flip it on my iPad or a phone and work from it that way. This is the matte medium from Liquitex, and I'm going to brush it on top of this graphite on the Gelli plate. I'm bending over so that I can see the reflection on here, and that'll tell me what spots I missed. I'll just let that dry, and what that does is it puts a separation layer between the plate and the ink. So the reason why the ink would bead up and be repelled by the plate is that there's mineral oil in there. And you can see that in the paper when you store it on top of there, like overnight. I'm looking at this, and it looks like, I think a couple sections repelled the matte medium. Like you can see that right there. I could put another coat on there, Or I was thinking a gel would work better. I have these gel mediums from Liquitex, and I think because they're thicker, it would stay put. Now, I don't know if I should put a second coat on here, or maybe I'll just leave it the way it is. This is just a test, so I'm not going to fuss over it. You're not supposed to use a heat source like a heat gun on these plates, but a hairdryer set to cold should be fine. Also, this hairdryer has a low setting that when I feel it with my hand, it feels like it's like 90, 95 degrees. Plus, I can also hit the cool button on the back to regulate the temperature. So I just want to make sure this is dry before I paint over it. This gives me a chance to try out this brush pen again. So I'll go in there and put in some lines. Maybe I'll use big brush pen. I have all my high flow acrylics in this plastic case, and that's how I shake them all up at once. I'll start with some naphthol red light, ultramarine, maybe some phthalo blue. These often get clogged at the top and you just sort of like pop it off. Of course, you get it all over your hands. I've got phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, naphthol red light, Benz yellow, burnt sienna, and titanium white. These are the mini brushes from Arteza. There's a whole set of them. If I want to preserve the white highlights of the boat, I'll put that in first. For the red, I'll just put it in straight. Then I'll add a little bit of ultramarine in there to make it darker, and I'll use that for the shadow area. Now you can add water to it to create like a wash, and this is kind of the fun part. You get to get a little bit more creative with the wash. So that's the ultramarine, but I think maybe I'll go with some phthalo, and then some areas will be ultramarine. I'm going more opaque, so I added a little bit of titanium white in here. You can use that to add like highlights in the water. Now the thing you have to think of is if that dries and you put white on top of it, that white won't show through because you're painting from behind. Now if I want to add some white into this area, I probably could push it through so that it does show up. If this were dry, that wouldn't work though. I'm trying to put in some darker areas. If this is still wet, it should mingle with the paint that's already there. I don't know how well these lines are going to show up. I think if the paint's wet, I think it'll work. I'm going to let that dry and then we'll pull the print. See what happens when I spray this. I let it dry while I was eating lunch, and now I'll mix up a color to roll on top. I think I'll do a similar beige color, so it's mostly yellow and red, and maybe a little bit of blue to make it more neutral. I think I want it a little bit more warm, so I'll add more yellow and red. I'll use my soft brayer to roll this on. So I want to be careful with this. Then I just line up my paper on this blue line, press it down. I'm just taping this in case I want to put it back down. I won't move it. Now last time I lifted it too soon. I think I need to let the paint dry more than I did that first time. Okay, let's see what we got. Not bad. I like how the washes turned out from the high flow acrylics. There's also pen lines and pencil lines in there, which give it a little bit more detail. I like this misty area right here that goes into the shadow. I'm just gonna wipe this down, and you'll notice that there's still graphite on here. You need to use baby oil to get that off, or mineral oil. The baby oil removes the graphite pretty easily. You can see I just wiped it a few times and it's gone. And then I think it helps to go over with the soap and water again, just to remove any excess mineral oil. I liked how this turned out. I'm thinking about what I can do in the next print to improve it. So I noticed that some of these sections were repelled by the plate, and I'm thinking that gel medium wouldn't be repelled by the plate because it's thicker. So I'm going to do another print of a boat. Here's the drawing for it. I'm going to use high flow acrylics again, but before I do that, I think I want to make some improvements to my registration system. After cleaning it once or twice, I realized that this paper is not going to hold up, and I thought, this is plexiglass, why not put it on the other side? So I'm going to do that now and get started. Just take the plate off, and then I can peel off the masking tape. I think lining this up shouldn't be too hard. I could just put this on top and make a mark where this ends, and that way I know where to line this up. I'll just tape that down and I can get started. Now I have a clean piece of plexiglass I can put the plate on, and I'm good. Here's my drawing. I'll just turn it over, line it up with the plate. I have very faint marks in the corner to where the image begins and ends. So I'll rub it down with my hand, and then I'll use the Baron to apply more pressure to it. You really don't need a ton of pressure. I mean, even just laying it down on there will transfer it. Okay, let's take a look at this. I could tape it down over here or hold it down. So there it is. I have a drawing that I can work from. This time I'm going to use the Liquitex gloss gel, and I'll use a brayer to put it on so it doesn't go over the edge. Hopefully this is thick enough that it won't get repelled by the plate. Let's see what happens. Okay, I'll let that dry and then I'll start inking it and adding color to it. This time I think I'll outline it with ink just to make the lines bolder. I used a hair dryer to make sure this is dry, and then I'm going to go over it with the high flow acrylics. This time I figure I'll try out this Strathmore Bristol paper. It seems to be about the same smoothness as the Stonehenge, so we'll see how that works. I'm going to use a white this time, so I'm using Liquitex Basics. Alright, so carefully roll this on. Okay. Then I'll use the Baron to apply more pressure. I'm going to let this sit, make sure it dries, then I'll pull it. I took a break, had lunch, I let this sit for maybe an hour. I had some weights on top of it. Let's see how it turned out. It came out pretty good. There's a little part that got stuck here. I was able to repair the corners by dabbing them with some acrylic gel. I aligned the plate to the print and pressed it down. When the gel dried, I was able to lift the last bits of paint from the plate. Please like this video if you found it useful, and let me know in the comments if you want me to make more jelly print videos. Thanks for watching.